Sean Thiessen is a director, storyteller, and screenwriter, and as you hear from this conversation, a close friend. In all of the time that I've known Sean, Sean has known exactly what he's wanted to do with his time on this earth, and so I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk to him and put forward this conversation for you to get to know him a little bit better. First, I want to thank the supporters of this podcast. Noble Lore is a agency in St. Louis, Missouri that makes podcasting as easy as it can possibly be. You sit down, have a conversation, and they take care of the rest. This podcast is also supported by Legacy Interviews. Legacy Interviews records your loved ones' life stories so that future generations can know their family history. Now on to my conversation with Sean Thiessen. That's a weird culture change. The fact that we as, a society became content with putting our God-worshipping centers inside of strip malls. That seems off.
It does, yeah. But there's also something that feels kind of like grassroots about it. That's like in a way admirable. Like is it more weird than like building a cathedral? You know what I mean? It's like, think of all the time and resources that go into that are not going into like helping people. You know what I mean? Feeding people.
Interesting. That's a good point. Did you guys ever go to church regularly? I know your dad did. Meetups and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What type of church did you grow up going to?
So I grew up it's called the Worldwide Church of God, and it changed a lot over time. I don't actually know what the denomination was. I think it was non-denominational, or it was like its own denomination sort of thing. By the time I was growing up in it, it had changed a lot. It used to be a lot more, like when my parents were growing up in it, a lot more conservative and like, honestly, like Jewish. Like they adhered to a lot of like those sorts of practices, which I think is interesting. I think in general, like a lot of Christianity is like trying way too hard to be Jewish, and it's like, I feel like you're missing something here.
Say more about that. What are those types of practices?
I think it's just like strict adherence to the law, and also like really taking. So it's interesting when you read the New Testament. There's actually like two gospels. There's like the gospel for the Jews and the gospel for the Gentiles. And the Apostle Paul is the herald of the gospel for the Gentiles, and it's different. But I think that the church, as I have experienced it, kind of combines the two, and it creates a lot of confusion. I actually remember really specifically, I used to date this girl who her parents were missionaries, who was super religious, and I really looked up to them and like wanted to be like that level of religious, right? And I remember one time we were doing like a Bible study together, and we were coming across these like contradictions, and like I didn't have the framework to identify like the source of those contradictions. But I remember we were just like going back and forth, eventually got her dad involved, and we're just doing these like mental and like logical gymnastics to like make the theology like fit together. And it's like, well, it's a balance, whatever. And it's like, this doesn't feel right to me. Like something about this is off. And then kind of came to this idea of like the two gospels, and you divide the word, and all of a sudden it does make sense, and it all kind of clicks into place. So anyway, that was like a theological revelation, I guess.
So the contradictions came from the fact that the Gentile and the Jewish gospels were trying to be reconciled in this one.
Yeah, because I think what we were wrestling with was like something from Paul's letter to the Galatians and something in the book of James, and like people really, at least in that culture, really like the book of James because it's super direct. It lays out like, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And they really, really liked that. And because it was pragmatic, I guess, but it's not for the Gentiles. And like, you see in the New Testament, like there is tension between I think it's those two people with James and Paul, maybe Peter and Paul. I can't remember, but there's like tension because it's like they're heralding two different messages.
Which message resonated more with you at the time?
Absolutely, Paul. 100%. I've always liked his writing more.
And that's the case still?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Say more. Why? What resonates with his message?
I think it's that it's, well, one, I feel like it's for me. And it is the message of like uninhibited grace, you know? And like, I think that we can really go down a rabbit hole here that I don't necessarily want to, but I really believe that like, okay, so I had this, I'm pivoting just for a second, but I had this interesting conversation with Vance Crow the other day about like the concept of like forgiveness came up, and that like forgiveness is more for the person who is doing the forgiving than the person who's being forgiven. And I was like, you know, that actually is a really interesting way to think about Christianity, because in the tradition that I grew up, like the forgiveness of God is like very much for you, and you have to accept it in order to be rescued from like damnation, from punishment, right? But it's like, well, if the judge forgives you, if the judge pardons you, the only way that I'm going to end up in a jail cell is if I put myself there, because no one's enforcing that, because I've been forgiven by the judge, right? And so like, what if accepting the forgiveness of Christ is more for you, right? It's about freeing yourself and forgiving yourself. That's what accepting that forgiveness is. And then you free yourself from like the guilt that you can kind of torture yourself with. So I don't know.
What does that mean to you as
Not a
far
theologian.
as far as Christ as a character who's undergoing character development? How would you translate the message that I'm hearing you describe as far as thinking of forgiveness in that way to like, I guess, him as the main character?
Not really sure. I think like, because are you getting at that, like, if you think of the forgiveness in that way, it sort of like diminishes the sacrifice, like him dying on the cross?
Not necessarily, but if the forgiveness is for the person who's undergoing the process of forgiving, then if it's for them, they're undergoing some sort of change as a product of having forgiven.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, right. That's an interesting question. I think that like in that case, it would, if you're like kind of taking this approach to the whole thing, that it's setting the example of forgiveness rather than like, it's setting the example so that you can forgive yourself, right? It's like giving you the permission, you know, because there is kind of like two components to it. Like if you wrong me and you feel bad about it, like you want me to forgive you, I'll forgive you, but then you still have to forgive yourself, right? And I think that like you accepting my forgiveness, like if I say I forgive you, like you're off the hook, but you still have to forgive yourself in order to move on from that transgression.
It's interesting to hear you talk about these things in detail, because I've known you for over 10 years now, and I don't think I've heard you talk about these ideas this much as you have in the last couple minutes.
Oh, really?
In
That's
all
funny.
of that time. Going back to what resonated with you from Paul and the way that he laid out these gospels, or maybe more broadly, how has growing up in the Christian like religious infrastructure changed the way that or influenced the way that you think about telling stories now? Or what are the elements of those stories that you think are most sort of canonical to the elements of all story?
Wow, that's a big question. I think that growing up in church and learning about the Bible tuned me in to the importance and the power of a story very early in life. The Bible is chock full of amazing stories and stories that have been replicated and I think have inspired a lot of like modern stories. But I think that one of the most powerful elements to me is the parables. Jesus teaching in stories, I think speaks to the power of them. Because when you look at a parable, like you can distill it down to like a point, but then somebody else could read it and distill it down to a different point, and you can apply it and like into a lot of different situations and learn different things from it at different points in your life. And like keep going back and keep mining them, right? And so like that's the power of a story, is that like when you distill it down to a single point, it kind of takes the power away. For me, it's like, well, if you could then just say that. If you can just like sum it up, then just say that. But it's like, well, no, you tell it in a story because it's richer, and it involves you emotionally. You connect to it emotionally. And I think whenever you connect emotionally to an idea rather than just intellectually, it sticks better. I think a good example of that is like, just anecdotally, it's way easier to learn about subjects that you're interested in than ones that you're not, because you're like emotionally involved with the material, you like it. So
on that note, to movies, what's a movie that you watched when you were really young, and the lesson that you would have taken from that at the time versus you revisiting that now and entering your 30s? What's a movie that stuck out to you when you were young, and how has the lesson changed over time?
Oh, what a question. So the movie has to be Spider-Man 2. You knew I was going to say that.
Nice.
I love that movie so much, and I have loved it. So that movie came out in 2004. Would have been the summer of 2004, so I'd have been like 9, I guess. I remember having dreams about it leading up to it. I remember specifically, I was staying at my aunt's house, and I had a dream that I went to the theater to watch Spider-Man 2 and like watched Spider-Man 2 on a movie screen in my dream. It wasn't the right story, but it was really cool. But anyway, so I think that, when you're a kid, it's more about the swinging around, and the action and fighting Dr. Octopus and all that kind of stuff. I think as I watched it as like a teenager, I remember one time I was a teenager and I got sick one night and, felt really terrible. And, I'd woken up in the middle of the night and went into the living room and was on the couch, turned on the TV, and Spider-Man 2 was just like on TV. So I watched it. And I remember it really like resonating, this idea of like responsibility, that is in that. And it really like, even then it like challenged me to like be better. And as I've grown up, I think every time I go back to that movie, it kind of comes back into my life at like profound times, over the years. And it is a story about responsibility. Because like over that story, he like turns his back on his purpose and then comes back to it. And he sacrifices things that he loves the most in order to fulfill his responsibility, and then he is rewarded for that sacrifice at the end. And so it's a happy ending, right? But I don't know. I think that like at certain times in my life when I felt like I'm straying from the path, I watch Spider-Man 2 again, and I like come back to myself, and I come back to my path.
The entire time that I've known you to have clarity over the purpose that you want to write and direct movies.
Yeah.
Talk about a time that you did stray from the path. Was there ever a time in the last, decade plus that you did turn your back on that being what you were going to do long term? Or have you always maintained that clarity of vision that one way or another you would make it towards that dream?
So let me let me go back a little bit. So I've always really enjoyed telling stories ever since I was a little kid. I think I've always had an aptitude for writing. I've always enjoyed it. And I remember like when I was in the 4th grade, we had like free writing time, and people would usually write kind of like a one and done thing. We'd share them with the class. But I had this story going on. It was called The Foxes. It was about a family of foxes that like gets lost. I don't remember all the details, but it was long. It was like this like ongoing thing. So every time we had like sharing our free writing, I would have like a new installation in this story, and everybody would get like really excited about it. And it was just like a different thing than anybody else was doing. So I think, I've just always kind of had an aptitude for that. And like, it goes back to like, I watched a lot of cartoons and had a lot of like action figures and stuff, and would tell pretty elaborate stories with the action figures. And it's just sort of living out like fantasies, right? It's like an opportunity for all of these like disparate characters to have a new story and they all come together and stuff like that. And then we were really good family friends with this man named Javier Saltaris, and he is a comic book artist. He like drew Ghost Rider. He's drawn like everybody, but he drew Ghost Rider in the 90s and like really helped to like make that character like the Ghost Rider that we know and love today. Like he really helped make that character who he is. And so I was exposed to that and like the behind the scenes of comic books and getting to like go into his office and see like the pages that he's penciling right before they get printed. And like that was a really cool process. And I got really interested in comic books, and I wanted to be a comic book artist for a long time and drew a lot of pictures and stuff. That interest eventually developed into wanting to do animation. I'm a really big fan of Chuck Jones and like his Looney Tunes work and Tom and Jerry and all that stuff. And I wanted to be an animator. Animation is extremely tedious, and I don't think I had like really the patience for it. And that sort of led into like a fascination with live action film. And I remember when I must have been like 13, 14, going back to Spider-Man 3 comes out. And as Spider-Man fans would know, that movie leaves some to be desired, especially coming off the heels of Spider-Man 2, which is one of the best superhero movies ever made. Spider-Man 3 is like, doesn't quite like hit the mark in a lot of ways. And I remember thinking like being really disappointed, and as a fan just being like, I feel like I could make a better Spider-Man movie than this. I could have told a better like Venom story than what they did in this movie. And then I sort of started thinking like, could I? And like that sort of launched an interest into filmmaking, and then very quickly realized it's like a lot harder than it looks, right? So from there, I got a little more interested in it. And then in high school, I started a filmmaking club. I actually like stopped sports so that I could do it, because sports just like took up way too much time, and I was like, I want my after school hours to be dedicated to this. This is more important to me. So I started a filmmaking club, which consisted of me and a bunch of actors. And so like we'd come up with concepts together, but like I would write the scripts and I would film them and I would edit them, and I would just be like at the high school till like 7 p.m., just in the editing bay, because I didn't have anything at home to do this. So I'm like in the editing bay editing these videos, and that's kind of, I was like kind of cutting my teeth on stuff. And
you mentioned a moment ago that as you were heading towards this path and realizing that you wanted to in one way or another work on movies, and realizing that that was going to be a lot harder than you thought initially. What were some of the things that, despite the fact you were in high school, you were able to realize whenever you were looking into the space that would have made it hard for that to be something to just like dive into with your youthful enthusiasm, as like that being the path that you wanted to go down?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think like I realized very quickly that translating what's in your head onto the screen is challenging, right? And it took like several years actually of kind of learning the craft and like a lot of the technical pieces of it. I remember I was in college whenever I made this like music video, just like as an assignment. It was for a song by the band Bleachers, if you know them. But it was the first time I ever shot something and saw it on the screen, and it actually looked the way that I had pictured in my head. And so it took like years of doing it before like that moment actually happened. And why is it challenging? I mean, it's all kinds of things. But that was like a pretty pivotal moment for me. And I think realized like, okay, I think I can do this. And then you just continue down that path. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But
if you were starting your journey again post high school, knowing what you know now, having gone to school for film and even having moved to LA and lived there for 5 years, would you go to school again?
That's an interesting question. I mean, on one hand, I want to say no because you don't need the degree. I feel like you could use the money that you spend on school and go make a movie, and that would be like a more valuable education. But at the same time, like school offered like a structure for me. I think that like screenwriting, like the introduction to screenwriting is the most valuable class that I have ever taken. And it like literally changed my life. Because I mentioned that I always had like an aptitude for writing and an interest in it. But whenever I was making these like sketch comedy YouTube videos in high school and I was making short films and stuff, I would write these scripts and feel like I was missing something. I'm like, I don't feel like I have a direction here. Like I have these ideas and I can like kind of write this dialogue and I have these characters, whatever, but like I don't understand what structure is and I feel like I'm missing something. And that class taught me what I was missing. It kind of like illuminated that to me. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it was great. You know, we talked about like being interested in something helps you learn it. And I was writing actually What Rhymes with Reason while I was taking intro to screenwriting. So from day one, I had like context that I don't think probably anyone else in the class had, but it was context that really helped me latch on to the lessons because I was like applying them in my head to what I was working on from the get-go. And that was like really, really beneficial.
And what were some of those elements that you realized at that time that you were missing before that now you know to incorporate into the screenwriting process?
So it was a lot of things. I think one was just like kind of a path for working, you know, so like how do you create an outline and how do you think about an outline? And the other was more fundamental is like, what is structure? What are the elements of structure? Why does it exist? And how does it actually hold your story together? I had read this book called Save the Cat. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's by a screenwriter. He was this Hollywood screenwriter named Blake Snyder. And it's Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need. So I was like, well, I'll just read that first and I'll be good to go. And that book, I think it does have really interesting and valuable things to say, but it's a very, it's what they call like a paint by numbers book. It's like literally this plot point should be on this page, you know, and you should have like this sort of like rigid structure and pace for your story, but it's not really explaining why. Like, why do these plot points exist? Why is this like roughly the shape and pace of a story? And then intro to screenwriting, when I took that class, it illuminated those things and it presented them more as principles rather than like just these like marks to hit, right? And the principles are way more helpful. It's a lot more flexible and there's like the why of it all. So just like gives you a little bit more to work with.
Going back to the other question that we veered into context off of, which was there a time where you did turn your back on the passion direction of like writing movies and directing movies? I would perceive the answer to be no, but was there a time where that was the case where you were like, I don't think that I'll make it to this point? And
the answer pretty much is no. And so like picking back up kind of in the story, I went to college and I did 2 years at a community college and took some video courses there. It was mostly like general education stuff, and it was free because I had like my A+ scholarship, you know. And then I went to Missouri State and I did my last 2 years there, and that was I started learning more about screenwriting, and then also making films and making some really, really great friendships there. So I'm getting, this is such a long-winded answer to your question, but going back to like, would I go to school? I think like I can't undo that choice, and I wouldn't want to because of the relationships that I made there. And that was the most important part of it. And I think that I did learn things, you know, from a technical and from like a craftsmanship perspective, especially about writing. But the most valuable piece of it is the relationships that I built. And it was like the opportunity to make things with like-minded people.
So for context with what rhymes with reason, this is a real script that you were writing that ended up getting shot. It was a feature film, and we'll talk a little bit later in the conversation about some of the analogs between maybe shooting independent movies and how that can be like startups. But you ended up getting a nationwide release date in theaters everywhere.
Yeah,
it was October 23.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, what was something that you learned from working on a real script that was going to be produced and shot as a film while you were in school? Something that you learned from doing that you didn't learn like from any of your classes?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, working on it while I was in class really helped a lot of that information stick, and I was able to apply it. But then the writing of What Rhymes with Reason continued for like several years after college, right? And so, and I would sort of like pick it up and put it down, kind of depending. There are a lot of factors through all of that. So it wasn't like 5-6 years straight of working on it. It was just pick it up, put it down. But I did work on it over the course of several years, and I think that. I'm trying to think of like specific lessons. I could maybe come up with like lessons about like the craft of screenwriting, but I think what was more impactful was everything else. It was like the process of the movie getting produced, and one of the biggest pieces of that was financing. So, and I guess this is related to craft in a way. So, What Rhymes with Reason is sort of like an anomaly. It's like it is this like coming of age adventure movie, and it has these like faith elements to it, but it's not like so overtly a faith movie like something like God's Not Dead or one of these, right? And I'm sure this has also been true the whole time you've known me. My favorite band is the band Switchfoot, and I've taken a lot of inspiration from them over the course of my life in different facets. But one of them is like, they are not so much like a quote unquote Christian band as they are just like a band of Christians, and their faith impacts the way that they write music and what they sing about. But I think it's like pretty accessible for all kinds of people, and it's like unsanitized, if that makes sense, which I think a lot of Christian music, it sort of has to like fit the mold of like what we're doing here. And their music doesn't. It can get like pretty ugly, and they talk about stuff that's like big questions and messy stuff. And I love that. And it's like, I wanted to make like what I called like the Switchfoot of movies, where we can like get our hands dirty a little bit, but come at it from this perspective of faith and of hope. And so we were trying to craft this story that's like this crazy balancing act of all of those things, right? Where it is coming of age, so it's like emotional and it's funny, and it has these like adventure elements, but it also has these faith elements, but not too much. And right, and it's just like you're spinning all of these like tonal plates, right? Which is like, it's hard to do with anything. And I think that we actually like more or less struck the balance that we were looking for. But whenever it came time to finance the project, going out to, and the movie was financed through like private equity exclusively. We went down a lot of different routes. What we experienced trying to raise money is like people were having a hard time putting What Rhymes with Reason in a box, because what we were doing, like I said, it's you're spinning all these tonal plates. What is this? And you're sort of like writing these genre lines, like where is this? Where does this go? More importantly, like who is this for? And there isn't really anything like exactly like it, which is cool on one hand, but also really challenging on the other because people don't know where to put it. And so because of that, it's like, how do you guarantee ROI on this thing, right? It's like independent film is like such a gamble for an investor to take anyway. So with something like this, that's like, don't know exactly where this belongs or how this is going to make its money back. It's like an even bigger gamble. So it was a hard sell. Eventually we did find the right partners they like saw what we were trying to do. They really believed in it. They wanted to see it happen and they supported us, which was really cool. So thankful for that. But anyway, so I guess like the lesson of all of this is understanding what you have, and like from the get-go, from the like the fundamental like core of the screenplay, like the idea, the concept, and the execution, all of this, like kind of having an understanding of like where that fits in the marketplace. And like that can sound like sort of like a creative compromise, and it is if you allow it to be. I don't think that it has to be. It's just being realistic about what you have. And once you kind of know that, then whenever you go out to like get that money, you have like, I think just like a good way to like pitch it, basically, you know. And I think that we just like really struggled with that. And I think it starts with the screenplay, and that's just like my inexperience that I think made that ultimately harder on us. I think if I'd leaned a little bit more into maybe the adventure part of it or the coming of age part, I don't know exactly. I don't think I ever quite figured it out, what was like missing, what the like hook was to make the project like sellable. I don't think I ever quite figured it out. So like moving forward, that's something that I really want to like avoid in the future. So
going off of things you learned from doing that and the things that made that sort of analogous to a startup, as I understand it, right, you started working on the script, and the script is sort of like your prototype. That's your minimum viable product, and that's like the asset that you will use to present to get buy-in from your first round fundraisers, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to believe in that story that you want to tell, and you're going to have a budget to shoot it. And then that's basically what your ask is the production budget. And so what I'm hearing you say is that you were able to get the right private equity partners based off of your script who kind of got what you were doing there. And then after you shot that, as I understand it, and then there was another round of fundraising in order to sort of help with distribution and to enter into film festivals and travel and these sorts of things. Because when you're shooting one of these big movies, you get like all of that money up front. Or like you've got the marketing budget, you've got the production budget, you've got like the budget for the actors, you've got the budget for everything else, versus like when you're coming up grassroots like this, that's sort of like your waves of financing, like in startup world. I think that's really interesting whenever I learned all this from you. Maybe like talk about some of those like elements of progressing through that podcast, and then how you guys got to the point where as an independent film, you did end up getting one night where that premiered in theaters everywhere.
So the screenplay it serves a lot of functions. One is like, it's a blueprint for how we're going to make this movie. Whenever you're writing a screenplay, like you want it to read like more or less how you're going to experience watching the movie. And there's some like technical requirements within that, so that like, cause it's what the crew is going to be looking at, and it's like the unifier, right? It's like, this is what we go to know what we're doing today. It's what the actors, is how they know what to do and say, and you know, all this. It's also, like you mentioned, a sales document. It is like the thing that is probably going to push someone kind of over the edge to like, yes, I'm going to finance this, or I'm not. But sometimes a project will get financed without somebody even reading the script, because a pitch is also really, really important. And a lot of times that's kind of all it takes. So we had like a pitch deck that, you know, sort of explains like this is what the movie is. This is how it's going to look and feel, and kind of the mission behind it, whatever. And then also sort of more of like the business plan, the business kind of breakdown of things of like, this is where it fits in the marketplace. And these are the kinds of stars that we can kind of see doing this. And this is like the budget level that we want to be at and all that good stuff. But you're right that like you have, your production ask, but I think that like it is wise. And I think that we did kind of have like more or less like a production plan, but also a print and advertising plan. And for like context on like bigger movies, a lot of times the like print and advertising, which would be like creating the deliverables for like movie theaters and all that stuff, and also the ad budget to market the project. A lot of times like that budget is as big as the production budget. Because you got to put Captain America 4 in everybody's face so that they know it's coming, right? That's important. So, I think but that money, that P&A money did come, I think later. But yeah, how we got into theaters. So that was a whole process too, because like once you can like make a movie, but then you have to distribute the movie, right? And so there are companies that like that's what they do. They're distributors, and getting a distribution deal is kind of a tricky thing. And it all kind of goes back to that same stuff that you have in your pitch deck of like ROI and who is this for and how are we going to do this. So our distributor for that theatrical wasn't even really like a theatrical run because it was literally one night, but it was Fathom Events. So Fathom Events is like this company that it's like comprised of 3 different movie theater chains. I think it's AMC, Regal, and Cinemark all kind of have this like partnership on Fathom Events. And Fathom does like, they do a lot of like family movies and like religious movies and like anime and like I think some documentaries and stuff like that. Kind of these like specialty run movies, and sometimes it'll be one night or 2 or a week or whatever. The point of all of that is to like fill theaters whenever like maybe the slate from like the studios is a little bit light, so they can like keep people coming to their movie theater, right? So we were able to do a Fathom release for What Rhymes with Reason. It was one night, but it was nationwide, and it was like it was like hundreds of theaters, which was pretty wild. That was like such a surreal experience for me, because like I'd done some movie premieres before of like short films and stuff that I made, but it's like everyone that's watching it is there in the room with me, but this was like I was getting texts from people sending me like photos of themselves in the theater from Texas and Georgia and New York City and Los Angeles, just like all across the country, friends and family. And I was like, whoa, everyone's like doing this at the same time, but we're not all together. Like that's wild. So that was a really cool experience. But Fathom ended up being the partner that we went with. I think just because like they were willing to do it. Like they saw what we were trying to do. They understood like the cause, the mission there, and they were down. They thought it was cool. And I think it went fairly well.
Talk about some of your ambition as far as like where you're going and the types of stories that you want to tell.
Sure.
Long term. Like I've heard you describe this to me as like you want to make movies that are part of the canon. What does it mean to make a movie or to tell a story that's part of the canon?
Yeah. So to me, that's like there are thousands of movies, right? A lot of them are good. A lot of them are not so good. But a few of them we return to over and over again. And that's different for everybody, but there are the select few that and I mean, it's a lot of movies, right, that we kind of come back to and return to a lot that we consider classics and everything, or cult classics. I want to make one of those. I want to make a movie that like never dies. It never goes away. People keep coming back forever. To me, that's what like a canonical film is, to me personally. And like that's what I want to do at least one, and that's, you have filmmakers that they have several that are like that, like a Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese or Christopher Nolan or Quentin Tarantino, or like they've made like several movies that the culture is going to continue to return to. But then you have like, the Jonathan Demme is. He directed The Silence of the Lambs, which is like one of the in my opinion, like the best movies. But I don't know. And he's made like several good movies, but that's the one that's like people know what that is and they will always go back to that movie, you know? So even if I just have one, I think I'll be satisfied with that.
After film school, you moved to LA and you lived there for 5 years, and then you made the decision to come to St. Louis. Talk about what it was like to be part of the scene in LA and be working to try to segue into fulfilling your dreams there, and then the things you learned throughout that prompted you to eventually not come back to St. Louis, but to come to St. Louis,
Yeah.
other than me convincing you to come here.
Right. To come back to Missouri, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, so moving to Los Angeles was a really, really exciting experience. So like I went there because the way that I perceived things to be, so a lot of my favorite movies and the kind of movies that I would like to make, or at least wanted to make at the time, was like big budget studio movies, you know, like I love Jurassic Park. I love Raiders of the Lost Ark. I love The Empire Strikes Back. All of those movies that I just listed are old. The studio system and the types of movies that it makes, it's just not the same as it used to be. I think that there are still exceptional movies and exceptional blockbusters that come out of the studio system. Like I think the Dune movies are like top notch. But I think that there's also like Jurassic World, you know what I mean? It's just like a different landscape. And there are lots of reasons for that, but I think that whenever I got there, it just like wasn't quite what I expected it to be. I think I was expecting like the Hollywood that like Steven Spielberg is my favorite director, and I think I was expecting the Hollywood that he kind of came up in, and it wasn't that. I think I also in college I moved to LA about a year or so after I graduated from college. And in college, I was like kind of a hot shot. I was like really good at what I was doing, you know, at least for that level.
Big
right?
fish in a small pond.
Big fish in a small pond, exactly. Yeah. And I think that I didn't realize how hard it was going to be. And I thought that like moving to LA would just be a matter of, I just need somebody to realize how special and talented I am, you know, and like that someone I'll just bump into somebody on an elevator on a street corner or something, and they'll realize how talented and special I am and give me some big opportunity, which is ridiculous. And you get there and you realize like now you were a big fish in a small pond. Now you're a minnow in the ocean, and everyone here was you in their town, and they came here to do exactly the same thing you're trying to do. It got very humbling very fast. And I, you know, you asked what was it like to be like in that LA scene. I hate to say this, but like, because it's like a little bit, it makes me sad. But I don't think I was ever really a part of it. I was there for 5 years, and I don't ever really feel like I was a part of it. And there are like varying reasons for that, but one of them was, you know, when I first got there, I was fortunate to have like some people. It was like Missouri State alum that kind of helped me out, got me some early jobs. But I started working as a production assistant in reality television, which is like very much not where I wanted to be, but it was a job, and it was a chance to like, I'm gonna start meeting people and making connections. Very quickly realized that like the reality TV world and like the scripted world don't overlap. So like it was really, really hard to like
meet the types of people that would change.
Yeah, exactly. And to like to leap over to the other side. But anyway, one day I was on set on I don't remember which reality show it was. I think it was like, well, I won't even say, but I got in the habit of asking people just as like a way to break the ice, like, hey, are you like living the dream right now? Or are you like, is this like a stepping stone to somewhere else? Like, what's your ambition? What's your deal? And several times people said on reality TV, they're like, no, this wasn't really the dream. I just kind of, you know, got stuck here. Like literally used those words. And those exact words came up multiple times. And they didn't seem like particularly sad about it. But it really struck me. And I didn't understand that at all at the time. But then after I was there for a couple of years, I realized like those jobs, a lot of those people, like they had been on the same show like for multiple seasons. And I realized like that's stability. And that stability is really, really alluring, because these production hubs like Los Angeles are like super expensive and they're super competitive. And so you get kind of tired after a while. And if you have like something stable come up, that's like a godsend. And I think that like how difficult it is maybe kind of like kicks the ambition out of some people. But I think it also teaches a lot of people that like maybe because I think a lot of people move out to be like, I'm going to be a director or whatever. And then they realize like they don't actually want to do that, which is totally okay. It's the same thing with writing. Like you might realize, oh, actually I'm not a writer. This actually is not how I want to live my life. I'm going to be happier kind of in this realm or in this role or leaving this industry altogether. And all of that is like totally okay. But, I was on one of these reality sets and I asked someone, or no, they asked me. I think it was like a follow-up to that question that I had asked, like, is this where you want to be or whatever? They flipped it back on me. What are you trying to do? And I was like, I want to be a writer and director. I want to write and direct movies. And they were like, then why are you here? Like literally straight up asked, why are you here? And I was like, shit, I don't know. Like, I just like, because I got a job. I don't know. I don't know anyone. I don't know anything. I'm just trying to like pay my bills. Where should I be? And they were like, well, I don't know. Like, if you want to write TV, you should be in a writer's room. You know, you should try and be a writer's assistant, a writer's PA or something and work your way in there. But for movies, like, I don't know. And I was like, well, shoot. And I never really like found the answer to that question, because it just sort of was, it felt like you're either like writing a movie or you're not, you know. I don't know, there's not like a hierarchy there necessarily, like a clear ladder to climb. So yeah, I never really figured it out. So I was like, well, I'll just like try and write as much as I can, and did that. And you know, I did like, I had some like pitches with producers, and I wrote several projects when I was out there that just kind of didn't amount to anything. But I was also through it all kind of working on What Rhymes with Reason, which eventually did amount to something. So, but then so we shot What Rhymes with Reason in, let's see, I moved to LA in 2018. We shot What Rhymes with Reason in 2022, I believe. And then it came out like a year later. So I went to Oklahoma to shoot the movie, and I was there for like a month, and then returned to LA. And before I went out to Oklahoma, I was working for like this like healthcare company doing like COVID testing, because this was like the height of COVID. All of the productions in LA shut down. Then they were able to come back, but they had to have this like rigorous COVID testing deal going on. So I got in contact with this healthcare company that was looking for people who had production experience to like help them kind of bridge the gap between healthcare workers and production. So I was doing that for a little bit, and I got to be on some really like pretty cool projects like Apple's The Morning Show, and like Pam and Tommy, which is on Hulu, and some other like some movies, which was cool to like be exposed to that kind of stuff. And at first it felt like this really noble thing, because we're like helping the world come back, you know, and like we're helping people stay safe. But then eventually like the sentiment around COVID like changed, and we became a nuisance, and that wasn't really like fun anymore. That job became a little bit of a drag, honestly, at that point. So I quit to go work on What Rhymes with Reason. So when I came back to LA from Oklahoma, I didn't have a job anymore. And I ended up finding some stuff here and there, but really from then on, it was quite a struggle. And this was like, I think the world was just starting to experience, you know, we're back from COVID, but it's not the same. And the production world, film production, TV production, has not been the same. And COVID's not the only reason, but it's one of them. And so I was really struggling there for a year, I guess a little less. And then, I got this opportunity to move to St. Louis, and I can tell that story too, but I ultimately took it. So
Well, man, talk a little bit about how far you've come in the last year and a half, 2 years now. You recently shot a movie. You're working on your next feature-length film. What have you learned from working with Legacy Interviews that's going to influence the types of stories that you tell in the future?
Yeah. I mean, being in St. Louis, it's been about right at 2 years, I guess. And yeah, it's been like a tremendous growth experience. It's been exactly like where I've needed to be and like what I've needed in my life. It's been really, really positive. It's put me in like a more stable position to kind of, I think like, I've talked to you about this a little bit, but like it gave me the opportunity to like start seeing a therapist, which has been like really valuable to me, and really work through like the experience of leaving LA, because I felt like a massive failure whenever I left, and that was really hard to process. I had like all my friends and all my family assuring me that was not the case, but I couldn't help but feel that way. I did not accomplish what I moved out there to do, and that sucked. I think I had kind of gotten in this like loop of, I made my dreams and my ambitions so big in my mind that I couldn't even like approach them. It was hard to motivate myself to do anything. And so I've really been able to like reevaluate my relationship with my goals. And that's made me more productive, which has been good. And it's just been like processing that whole experience, and it's taken a long time. And I think in some ways I'm still kind of processing it and still figuring out where to go from here. But like I didn't, I moved to LA to be a director. I didn't direct a single thing while I was there. I did some second unit directing when I was on What Rhymes with Reason, but that was, not a lot of time. I could count the number of hours I spent doing that on my fingers. So like it wasn't that significant. But since I moved here, I've been able to, directed this short film called Phone Tag that I wrote with my brother, who I live with now, which is awesome. It's like such a cool situation. We started a business together, a production company that we have really big plans for. And like being in St. Louis has opened up a lot of doors for me. And it felt really, really good to get back in the saddle, back in the director's chair. Mm-hmm. It's been good.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience coming here from Denver. And at the time in Denver, I thought Denver was like the next stepping stone to go to like the San Francisco or Boston or wherever the people who do what I do go to do what they do at the largest scale. And had sort of like a similar disillusionment where very similar circumstance. I'm like driving back from the Rocky Mountains and my car that I bought in high school breaks down on I-25 in Denver. And I know what it's like to be in that same position in the big city where I'm like, this is actually detrimental to me. I can't afford a new car. Now I'm a person who doesn't have a car in the big city because I actually can't come back from this right now. Like I liken this to the difference between like positive sum and negative sum games. I think coming to St. Louis specifically because like not that there aren't like good people in big cities too, like Denver's and say LA, but like LA for movies, it's like you said, you're a minnow in the ocean, and everybody there like might have comparable capability and is competing for a finite set of opportunities. Versus like now you're probably one of the biggest fish in this pond because there's not many fish in this pond, and you can really shine here, and the community around you is like, whoa, we have not that you're a shark, we have like a shark in these waters. Like, let's support this guy. And so like recognizing that, the community here is like willing. And I had that same experience with Vance as well. Like met him and, 2 weeks later, get a cold email where he's like, will you do some of these things for me for like $500 in order to help out? And I'm like, wow, that's 2 times the amount of money that I have in my checking account right now. Let's go.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe talk a little bit about what it was like to shoot a movie here and what you're hoping to do next.
Yeah, it was cool, man. It was a cool experience to shoot something here. It was kind of tricky because my friend Rachel produced for us, which was super helpful. She's been here a lot longer, and knew some people, and just kind of like had a lay of the land that I didn't necessarily. So that was great to have her on board. I didn't know like anybody. I knew her and I knew Tanner and I knew you, so like that was helpful. But as far as like crew members, I didn't really know anybody. So relied on her a lot to kind of like source some of those people. Met some awesome people. Our crew on Phone Tag was awesome. And St. Louis it's an interesting place. There's some really pretty locations here. And I've been driving around for a couple of years, looking around and thinking about like, it'd be cool to shoot something there. It'd be cool to shoot something over there. And on Phone Tag, we kind of got to do that. And the story, which sort of like this defies the conventional wisdom of making a short film, but it has a lot of locations, which was fun to kind of bop around. We got to show off a lot of, I think, different pieces of St. Louis, which was neat. So that was a pretty gratifying experience, and it was fun, and it was cool to like, we had scenes with like quite a few extras, and that made us nervous a little bit because we were like, how are we going to get all these people? But people showed up for sure. Like,
yeah, we had like 20 and 30 people on some
I've
of those
never
sets.
had an experience like that.
Yeah.
It was like unpaid, like just volunteer. Yeah, we'll just come like be on a set, which like being on a set is cool, but it's a lot of like waiting around and can be, as an extra, like honestly, kind of boring. So it was really cool. People were like down and positive and willing to do that the whole time. That was a neat experience. But yeah, what's next? Like you mentioned, I'm working on another script right now with same director as What Rhymes with Reason. This is a pretty different kind of project, but I was actually working on it this morning before I came here, and I'm going to work on it some more this afternoon. But I'm having a lot of fun with it, so that's been pretty exciting. And then I've got a long list of movie ideas, but I have one in particular that I'm going to start writing as soon as this current one is finished, and that one I want to direct. And we shall see, but I plan on hopefully shooting that in Missouri. That would be my dream.
Nice.
So.
What's the difference between, or which is more important, the screenwriter or the director? Or the script or the director?
Yeah. Ooh, what a question. That's interesting. I think that, I'll put it this way. I think that like a great director is going to really struggle to make a good movie from a bad script. So, but a great script is also not director proof necessarily. It's tricky. I honestly though, I think I'm going to go script. If I have to pick, they're both obviously important, but I think I have to go script because I think that like if you don't have it right there, you're kind of hosed. I think understanding writing is not something that all directors have. And I think that it is important. And I think that a lot of the great directors will tell you that it's important. Not that you necessarily need to be a writer, but you need to understand it and you need to know how to communicate with a writer. That's important. I think any great director will probably tell you that. I'm sure there's an exception out there, but most of them will tell you that. So I think that is an advantage. And I think that something that a lot of people have told me, and I think I agree with. So like the kind of movies that I'm really interested in making are like genre movies that are really accessible and entertaining, but also like have meat to them. Like they're made with quality, like craftsmanship and quality is really important to me. But like, and I like all kinds of movies, including like art house films that are like really challenging and weird. But that's not really what I want to make, because my favorite thing is like movie night. And that's why like our company, my brother and I's company, is called Midnight Premiere, because like the Midnight Premiere was an event. Is something that we went to whenever we were younger. Is this event that like you got to have like some grit to do it, and like it's fans only, right? Go to a Midnight Premiere, and the experience of like watching something together and all like laughing together, crying together, getting scared together, like that is what's really exciting to me. So making movies like for not just audiences, but like for like a big audience, like that is cool to me. And I've had a lot of people tell me that just from reading my writing or watching films that I've directed, that I have a knack for kind of taking something that feels familiar and bringing something like not necessarily new, but like substantial to it. Like, and that's what I'm trying to do. So that's always like a really nice compliment, I think, to get, because that's the goal.
What have you learned about character development from having, had the opportunity to, without getting into specific stories, hear, hundreds of people tell their life stories through legacy interviews that's going to impact the way that you write characters in the future?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that legacy interviews has definitely had an impact. It's, I think, less so okay, so there are details of people's stories. We get a lot of farmers. And so that's like opened up sort of like a context, I think, that I've never had before, which I do see myself, I will like apply to some of the stories that I'm working on, which is kind of interesting. Never thought I would do that, but having like insight to that world has been kind of interesting. But I think that it's taught me about like relating to people, having conversations and connecting with people. And I think that as a director, like people skills is pretty important. And so improving my people skills is good. But I think it's also, that job has reinforced the importance of movies to me, kind of in an interesting way, because I've had a lot, we always ask couples, like, how did you meet? What was your first date? Things like that. I've had a lot of people say that their first date was going to the movies. And when it's a good movie, they remember the movie. And it's a lot of times something that they continue to come back to years and years later, decades later, which is pretty cool. But when it's a bad movie, or when it's a really bad movie, they'll usually remember that too. But if it's just sort of like whatever, they don't remember what the movie was. Either way, though, it's a part of their story. And these are people who they're not, most of them, like cinephiles, right? They're quote unquote regular people. They're like,
a movie's got to be one of the best first dates, because you're able to go in and you don't need to, facilitate a conversation with relatively limited common ground starting off. You go into this experience together and you watch a story, and then you've been given something to talk about after the movie for, however long you hang out afterwards. So it's a great context setter. I mean, for me, it's Jojo Rabbit, right? Getting married this June, and date number 1 was Jojo Rabbit at the Chase Park Plaza.
That's awesome.
5.5 years ago now.
Yeah. See, and you're never going to forget that. And so like going to the movies, seeing that movie is part of your life story, right? It's like a key part of one of the most important moments of your life, right? First date with future wife, I think, counts as one of the most important moments of your life. So like, that's why you do it, right? That's why you make a movie, is because it's going to be a part of people's lives, potentially in like a really important way. And that's why you want it to be good, because that's what people remember.
When we started the conversation, you were talking about the impact that like the concept of grace had on you as a person. What impact does your, conceptualization of the idea of grace have on the way that you think about writing characters and telling stories?
Oh, good question. Thanks for asking that. I think that whenever actors will understand this too, and I think all writers would as well, that you have to be able to empathize with every perspective. I think that that's one of the things that draws me to writing, is like, I'm a person who I'm pretty comfortable. Oh, actually, I don't know if comfortable is the right word, but I kind of gravitate at least to the gray area, and I can see multiple perspectives. I have a lot of empathy, which is sometimes good, sometimes bad, but regardless, I have it. And so I think that being able to like, this is just like different terminology, but being able to like extend grace to any perspective and any kind of person, any kind of character, allows you to get into their head, understand what makes them tick, and make them real, I think. I'm kind of having that experience. Definitely having that experience with the script that I'm writing right now. It's like I have to get into the perspective of this character, and a character who is very much based on like someone from my real life, in a situation that in the past has been really hard to empathize with. But now I see it unfolding in this story, and I have to dive in to this perspective, to this time and this place and these choices, and understand them from the inside out. And it's like a new level of empathy and of like grace. It's been really quite a process. It's been challenging, but like good.
Have you ever had to write a character that was evil before? I was thinking through the movies that you've written that I've seen, and I couldn't think of one.
Yeah, I don't think so. Monsters, yes. Which is interesting. You have to like have that same thing for a monster.
It's like the platonic idea of evil, but to write a character that truly like...
Yeah, I want to like the Joker, or like Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. Like,
how would you approach that?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it all just kind of depends on the context, I guess. But I think that in like the case of those characters, they do have a perspective and they have a philosophy. The Joker has a philosophy, right? He's chaotic and is evil, I would say. He's a person who just wants to watch the world burn, as as they say. But he has a perspective, and he has a philosophy, and he has a point that he's trying to prove. And I think that you have to latch on to that, figure out what that is. And I think that you can, on some level, like empathize with it to understand it. You don't have to agree with it. It's abhorrent, but you can understand it and get into that perspective. I think like, while we're on the superhero thing, like Magneto is like one of the best like villain characters. I think a lot of times like a villain actually is not pure evil. They always have some like not redeeming quality necessarily, but they have a perspective. They have a philosophy that you can attach yourself to and understand.
What about the differences in the impact on the environment or the world that's built around characters? You know, we talked a little bit about this earlier this week because I read this article last week. I can't remember off the top of my head now where it came from, but it was on the difference between the Dune universe developed by Frank Herbert and the Lord of the Rings universe developed by J.R.R. Tolkien, and how this differences in sort of like the karma scheme, if you will, between these two universes impacts the types of choices that their most heroic characters make. And so this article is making the point of like, say, Paul Atreides. Paul Atreides is always choosing the lesser of two evils versus like the heroic characters in the Lord of the Rings. They're always making leaps of faith and trusting that, you know, the universe will guide towards like the best path that could come of those leaps of faith that they're taking. How do you think about this, whether it's in general or in the storytelling process or just in your life?
Yeah, so I think what you're describing, it kind of goes back to just like a screenwriting 101 concept, which is that character is revealed by the choices that someone makes under pressure. And the greater that pressure is, the greater the revelation of character. If you present a character with a choice that like anyone would make that same choice, it's sort of a non-choice, right? It's like, it's not telling you anything about them. Everyone would do that. Or like truly a non-choice where they're sort of like forced into something. Also not interesting. It doesn't tell you anything about them.
This is fascinating.
But like in the case of Paul Atreides, you talk about choosing between the lesser of two evils. What he chooses, it is like, if you're an audience member, maybe kind of a coin flip on like what an audience member would choose between the two options, right? And so it does tell you a lot about him. Lord of the Rings is interesting, that idea of they're like constantly making like leaps of faith. But I think that those leaps do tell you things about the characters. It tells you that they're courageous. Mm. It tells you about what they believe in. Because the alternative is to like give up, turn around, go home, go back to the Shire. This is too hard, and they don't.
Wow. What are the other types of situations that you can put characters in that will reveal aspects of their character in novel ways?
I mean, that question is the fundamental question, I think, in like writing a screenplay and structuring a screenplay, because that's what you constantly want to do is put your characters into positions where they have to make choices, ideally between the lesser of two evils or the greater of two goods, because those are the things that are going to tell you the most about them. Because again, like if it's a choice that is obvious, it's not really a choice. It's weak. It's a weak choice. And it's going to be a weak moment in your story.
What is a choice that you've made in your life that reveals the most about your character?
Oh, how personal do I want to get? Whenever I left LA, I mentioned I had to end a relationship. When I did that, I didn't have to, but I chose to. And I think that doing that was the right thing to do, but it was really, really hard. But I think that I hope that ultimately that is like a revelation of good character and of maturity. But I think that even though I ultimately made what I would consider the right choice for both of us, it was a little bit messier maybe than like it should have been or needed to be. And like hindsight is 20/20. It's hard when you're in the throes of it, right? But I do have like some, I would say, like regret about the way that I handled it, and that revealed to me that it is possible to do the right thing the wrong way. And I think that that's like tough. That's a tough lesson to learn, but it's an important one. And I think it's important in the context of screenwriting, for bring it back to that. Cause that's drama. That's interesting. That's the heart of like being alive. Like, what if you do the right thing the wrong way? What does that mean? What does that mean about right and wrong? You know, I don't know, but that's that gray area. That's that like complexity that, I think is really interesting to explore.
What are you most excited by right now?
The NBA playoffs. So it's going to be an exciting postseason in the league. No, I think, man, I'm really excited about the script that I'm working on right now. Truly, I think it's great. I'm excited about my future at Legacy Interviews and like the way that that's going, the path that we're on. I think is going to be really cool, and I'm super excited for the next script that I've got on deck. So whenever I was like 18, maybe even earlier, I told myself, like, kind of set a goal for myself. I'm going to direct a movie, feature-length movie, by the time I'm 30. I'm 30 now. Whenever I was in like my mid-20s, I sort of revised it a little bit to like, I want to at least be on the path to doing that, like directly on the path to doing that when I'm 30, in my 30th year of life. The reason I made the revision was because of What Rhymes with Reason, and seeing like how much of that process of like getting that movie going was outside of our control. So I was like, okay, I want to at least be on the path, because I don't know how long it's going to take to spin it up, but I want to at least be started by the time I'm 30. 30 now. If everything kind of goes the way that I think that it will, I'll be working on that script before I turn 31. And that'll put me on that track, on that path. So for a while I was really bummed because I was like, I'm not going to hit that goal. But now I'm like, actually, I'm like pretty close to it. I think I can kind of get there, and like I'll feel good about that. So I'm excited about, to get back to your question, I'm excited about that prospect and like moving everything forward.
Is there a belief that you have that is a common theme in any of the movies that you've made so far, written or directed, or is the belief that you have that you're looking for an opportunity to embed in a future story?
That's a very good question. So I think that first I'll tell this story real quick. So my senior thesis film, it was a short film. It was called Posers. It was like a coming of age, like monster movie. And after we did like a senior showcase, everybody showed their films, and I had some friends come to it. And afterward, one of my buddies was like, Sean, I could like tell the whole time that you made this. Like it was very much a like representation of you. And I like that made me feel really good. And I think that part of that is like, it's like sense of humor. And actually our buddy Jack, I remember, told me after Phone Tag, there were like lines in it that he was like, I know Sean wrote this line. I can totally like hear his voice in that character. And like, that's kind of a fun compliment. So there's some of like that, it's kind of like intangible, but it's just sort of like the essence of who I am that's sort of like coming through and stuff. But if there's something more, well, not even intentional, but maybe tangible, I think a lot about identity. And I think that comes through in like pretty much everything that I have written is like characters kind of struggling with who they are and how they're relating to the people around them and where they kind of fit in. I think I'm drawn to, so far, younger characters, a lot of teenagers, because that's the time in your life where you're like really like hyper focused on identity and figuring out your place in the world. And I think I've always sort of struggled with that. I've always kind of felt like an outsider, like I'm on the outside looking into things, always. And still kind of do a lot of times. And I've gotten more comfortable with it. But for a long time, like really bothered me, especially in high school. So, yeah, I think that those are persistent themes.
What have you taken away and internalized as a self-perceived outsider looking in who thinks deeply about story?
What have I taken away from it?
Yeah, in terms of observing other social dynamics or observing people acting out their characters in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that feeling like you're on the outside looking in, it's caused a lot of angst for me. Angst is always fun to explore in writing. But I think it's also made me an observer. When you're on the outside looking in, you're looking in at other people and observing them. And, I think like I can get to talk, like in this situation, obviously I can get to talking, but generally speaking, I would rather listen than speak, I think. And that's, I think, part of it. And I just like observing people. I like watching people kind of do their things and express themselves. I think I'm always kind of like mentally taking notes of things too, or literally, as I write a lot of things down too. But yeah, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say wallflower, because I think like, especially in college, I like came out of my shell a lot. I can be a lot more like involved and gregarious even if I need to be, but or want to be. But yeah. Does that answer the question? Did I get there?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
In what way do you wrestle with God through your characters?
Oh. Oh boy, let's see. In what way do I wrestle with God through my characters?
I could say the context for why I ask is we've talked like a little bit about like I'm largely influenced by Jung's writing. And I think through reading a lot of his stuff and the way that he sort of explores that relationship by encouraging this process of active imagination where you sort of like create characters that embody ideas and then you have them wrestle in your journaling, like not just journaling about like this is my day and this is what I did and this is how I felt about these things that happened, but as far as like a psychological practice, that's like specifically something that he encourages you to do, and I've gotten a lot of value out of that. And I feel like from doing that, there's sort of like a sense where I get like more so when reading, maybe because it's like you can kind of sense a little bit of that stream of consciously type of writing style. Like I get this probably more so in Dostoevsky than in anybody else I've ever read, even though they're translated, like in the Brothers Karamazov. Have we ever talked about this book? Or
A little.
Yeah, a little bit. The TLDR of like the story set up there is basically you've got four brothers. One of them is devoutly religious, but sort of like uses this as a fallback for being a shithead, because he's like, I believe in God, but all my sins are forgiven, so I'm going to go drink and be mischievous.
Sure, yeah.
And then you have one who's devoutly religious and really like tries to embody those ideas to the best of his ability. You have another brother who's sort of post-religious, and he's like, nothing is true, everything is permitted. There's no such thing as objective morality, and yet still feels internally that draw towards morality, and he has to wrestle with that.
Right.
And he's like off in St. Petersburg and he's writing these articles, but the articles don't necessarily reflect the wrestling that he has internally. And then you have a fourth brother who really, really looks up to his brother, who's like the writer in St. Petersburg, but he's a sociopath and he doesn't have that internal draw towards morality. And this whole book is really just, the environment pushing these characters towards each other as they're having to contend with their relationships with other family members in their town and their community and these sorts of things. And it's amazing. So I guess that was a little bit of my rambling in terms of why I ask you the question.
It's a good question. So I think that What Rhymes with Reason is probably, it's the best example that I have so far of like a pretty direct, like wrestling with God in a story, right? I think that story was inspired by the book of Job. And I think that in the book of Job, you have characters that are sort of mouthpieces for different philosophies. And so that was kind of like the starting place for the characters in What Rhymes with Reason. They're all going to kind of represent a different perspective. That ended up being like way less one-to-one with the book of Job than it started. But I think that movie is really kind of wrestling with the idea, not of like specifically God, do I believe in God, but like in a world, where maybe God does exist or doesn't, why do bad things happen to good people, basically. And if it is random, what's the point of living? Like, if you don't have control over the outcome of your life, is life worth living? Like, do you actually have agency? If your parents, like in the case of the movie, if your parents can just like die suddenly when you're a teenager, that's going to change your life forever. So are you actually in control, And I think that that's something that I kind of do continue, I think, to wrestle with a little bit. I do believe that life is worth living. And I think that that's the perspective that movie takes as well. It is a hopeful one ultimately, but it, I think, kind of goes there and kind of wrestles with that idea. I think that, so I've mentioned, I don't want to like pitch the story necessarily, but this the script that I'm going to work on after the one I'm currently writing has to do with like basically a person who suspects that they're being abducted by aliens, and I think that that one also is like ultimately a wrestling with like the concept of God and like what does it mean to have faith. How much does believing in something make it real or not? How do we know what to believe. And kind of getting into like what is the nature of reality, which is like there's a religious element of that, but also just like a philosophical one, which I think will be really interesting to explore through like a very like dramatic and like we've talked about like genre specific context, which I think will be cool.
Yeah, I mean, give the pitch. If you're happy to talk about it.
Okay, yeah. So the story, kind of as it stands in my mind right now, it's about this woman named Emily and her husband Arthur. They're like fairly young, married couple, pretty newly married, and they move like from the big city to this small town where he is from, and where his family is pretty prominent. His dad is like what would you like the owner or like the president, I guess, probably of a bank. And this is where some of the legacy interviews context kind of comes into play, is like having some insight into like small town bankers and like their relationship with farmers. So like they're an extremely prominent and successful family because they like manage huge amounts of money for like large swaths of land in this like rural place, right? But anyway, this couple moves there, and Arthur's working for his dad at the bank. Emily is a school teacher. It's the summertime. She hasn't started yet. She's at home alone. She's kind of fixing stuff up, but she feels very isolated and lonely. She starts having these really bizarre dreams and like weird experiences, and comes to find out that Arthur is having like similar ones, but he kind of chalks it up to coincidence. She's like, I don't know. She starts doing more research, does the deep dive. The experiences are getting like more bizarre and more intense. And as she's doing research, she finds that like what she is experiencing is consistent with people who claim to have been abducted by aliens, like what they experience. And she's like, well, that can't be right? Or can it? She expresses this to Arthur, and he's like, that's crazy. And also never talk about this again. Like my family has a reputation to uphold. And if you start talking like crazy, like that's going to, be a problem. But the experiences continue. She keeps going down the rabbit hole. And the idea is like the whole time you're sort of with her on this journey going back and forth between this is nonsense, right? Wait a minute, actually, like maybe not, and sort of going down that rabbit hole. Because when you think about like, oh, it's like little green men like taking you to their spaceship in the night to do experiments on you, like it's ridiculous. But as you keep going down, there are lots of like ways to explain this away. But then there's a lot of experiences, just anecdotal evidence, people that's like does make you kind of think twice about it. And there are people who have sort of taken that little green men concept a little bit further. It's like, actually, these are like interdimensional beings. That's why they're not from another planet. They're from another like dimension. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's like another leap, but it also like starts to feel more plausible. And it also starts to feel a little bit more like religion, like God and angels and divine beings. And so now you're blurring the line between like aliens and ghosts and demons and angels and all these kinds of things. And I think like all of that is really interesting to me. And I think like I said before, it's a chance to sort of explore kind of the nature of like reality and like, can you trust your own experiences to inform you about what is real? I think like there's a philosophical bend to that, but I think like even in my own life, like we live in the world of the 24-hour news cycle and the world of algorithms. We've talked about this before, how like we can both look at our social media and have very different experiences of what is real. And that really disturbs me. And I think that is something that I want to like exercise a little bit through a story.
How do you think about the idea of postmodernism? This is something that we've never talked about offline, but I'd be very curious to hear your perspective on postmodernism being this idea that because we can empathize with the narratives that any, subjective person might be, perceiving due to a given set of circumstances, that we can't necessarily weigh one narrative or one truth over another truth. And so this idea has sort of like permeated art and maybe like some movies and maybe now culture, even to the degree that you're describing. So now like we have this all like everybody can embody a different lived experience, a different reality. Everybody can live inside of a different reality. And because we don't have sufficient heuristics as a society for saying, actually, but this version of reality is more true than your version of reality. How do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a giant question, but I think that growing up in religion, like what I think you just call like mainstream Christianity, very familiar with this concept of absolute truth and this idea that like there is one way and like this is the way that it is and everything is like etched in stone. In the case of the Ten Commandments, quite literally. So that's a very like rigid way of looking at the world. And I think that that's where some of this like tension that I have within me comes from is I am confronted with this postmodern world is exactly what you're describing is where like, how do you validate one perspective over the other? How do you know what's true? And what role does like faith play in all of that? Because I think that like there's a difference between having faith and having certainty. And I think that a lot of times people try and make those the same thing, but they're not. And so, I mean, getting at your question, like, I don't really know what to think. And that's really uncomfortable, especially growing up in such a rigid sort of like worldview. I feel like I need to know the truth. I need to know the answer. And there has to be a singular truth. The idea that there's not is scary, like does not compute. That's really freaky to me. But it's interesting. So yeah, it's all like worth exploring, I think.
Maybe as a last question, what are the things that you take leaps of faith and believing to be true that you can never really with certainty know to be true?
Yeah, I mean, belief in God is one of those things. I can't call him up on the phone or anything. Can't show you a picture of him, but I do believe in God. I think that like what God is to me has continued to evolve over time. I think it gets bigger all the time in my mind, which is kind of cool, kind of exciting. I like that.
How would you conceptualize that currently? Like your relationship with God or what your belief in God like looks like? How do you see that on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I think, again, growing up like in Christianity, everything is very like, to me, like very simplified, kind of black and white. You have these images of like God as like this man with a long white beard in the sky, you know, his dominion is heaven. And you have the devil whose dominion is hell and all this kind of stuff. Very personified. And I think that I almost wore a Star Wars shirt today. And Star Wars is kind of interesting to talk about because I think the concept of the Force, you know, the Obi-Wan in the first one, he describes it as like the Force is everything. It binds us and it penetrates us. It is all like all the energy in the universe, whatever. And that concept is kind of based on the Hindu concept of Brahman, which is interesting. And I think that this is all, that concept is like very large, right? But I think that a lot of religions kind of get at sort of like that same thing. And I think that that's part of why something like Star Wars and this concept of the Force is so accessible and powerful, is because all of that, like, that's real. And I think that that is what God is it's the nerdiest answer in the world, but it's kind of like the Force. It is everything. It is in everything. And I think that it is still helpful maybe to personify God. And I think that like talking to God, communing with God following your sense of God, or like all of this is still really helpful. And I think that like a religious framework can be really helpful as a way to like engage with that, because talking about God as everything, what this like mysterious force that it is in all of the universe, whatever, like that's so abstract, it's hard to engage with. But I think that as I've gotten older, I've come to understand God more in that like big, all-encompassing way that is like, it's honestly, it's more humbling and like awe-inspiring even than like the man in the sky. So,
well, Sean Thiessen, I have faith in you.
Thanks, buddy. Likewise.
All right.
But I have lots of evidence for having faith in you. So,
well, I have. I'm building my data set for faith in you. I'll
excellent.
Let us split for the NBA basketball game. In fact, I'll see you there.
Right
We'll
on.
Smashes this evening.
Yeah,
having
buddy.
a burger and watching some basketball.
Go Lakers.